Catch him! Kill him!
Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to me, say that thou art High King of heaven, thou art. Hey, wanna play hide and clap?
Hey everyone, it's Donji Corleone here, and I am here with episode 8 of Halloween Horror Movie Reviews, Season 6. And this review for this episode is going to be for the remake of the film I reviewed in the last episode from 2005. The 2005 remake of the Amityville Horror, which this one is directed by Andrew Douglas and was produced by Michael Bay, and this was the second remake he produced after the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. And when this film came out, this was a remake that, when it came out, it got ripped to shreds by critics and audiences, despite making a pretty decent profit at the box office, and is often called one of the worst remakes of all time. And some of you are probably expecting me to act a little similar in this review. I'll get to more of that in a little bit, but what's the plot of the remake? Well, you're all familiar with the plot of the original. It's around December 1975 when George and Kathy, along with their 3 children, move into this house in Amityville, Long Island. What they don't know is 6 gruesome murders were committed there the year before by Ronald Defoe Jr., the oldest son in the family, who murdered his parents, his 2 brothers, and 2 sisters by shooting them with a .35 caliber in November 1974. And no sooner do the Let's Get moved to the house, they begin seeing horrible things, like the ghost of Jodie Defoe, who makes quite a few what I like about this version is that you actually do kind of see the appearance of Jodie in this version. And she looks pretty creepy, I will say that. And there's some horribly disfigured bodies in the basement, hearing ghostly voices through the house. George is the one, though, that notices it the most, and it isn't long before it becomes a danger to those around him. So eventually, when the local priest gets called to bless the house, he only ends up fleeing the house after being swarmed by flies. And then he issues a warning to Cassie to leave the house. But will they be able to escape before the house and its vengeful spirits take control of George or make him worse? So, as for my reaction, you know from the 1979 original I reviewed that in the last episode, I was not really a big fan of that film. I kind of find that one of the most overhyped horror films in the 1970s. A lot of people, though, seem to really hate this remake, though a lot more. And this is going to sound controversial to those who are ready for me to rip this movie apart and give it what they think it deserves. I'm actually not one of those people. I think I'm one of the rare side that actually kind of likes this remake. I actually think this film is a bit of an improvement than the original. I'm sorry to say that, but it's true. Sorry to say that, but this to me, I just think is better paced, it's quicker, it doesn't have a lot of filler scenes that drag on over 2 hours long, and you want to know something else, like this, what this movie does that the original kind of doesn't, it's actually about the Lutz family. Because this is what this should be about. I don't care about some detective. I don't care about some filler priest. Like, I want to watch the Lutz family in this story. That's what it should be about. That's what I like about it. So, how was this film made? Well, as you all know, around 2003, Michael Bay's company Platinum Dunes released their first feature film, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the 2003 remake. It was a hit at the box office. It was more mixed received by critics, but audiences seemed to really like it. And it made good money. And it also led to a bit of a bad problem. There would become a thing called Hollywood remakes would start to become more of a thing. And this was the second remake to be made by Platinum Dunes, fresh off the success of Texas Chainsaw. And ever since then, many horror films in the 2000s were trying to do remake after remake, make it like darker and grittier. There were some times it worked. There were times like Texas Chainsaw Massacre worked. Hills of Eyes it worked. The Last House on the Left it worked. Other horror remakes I can think of. What else can I think of? What else horror remakes? Some of like the Dark Castle Entertainment remakes, like 13 Ghosts, actually were decent. My Bloody Valentine 3D was decent. Now what else is there? I feel like I'm missing another remake or so. Oh, Friday 13th, 2009. That also worked. And there was times that just fell flat on its face. There was Psycho 98 that fell flat on its face. The 1006 that fell flat on its face. What else can I think of? Black Christmas 2006 at the time fell on its face, but it's gotten slightly better reception from people now. Any of the Americanized remakes of Japanese horror films, like except for The Reign of the Grudge, to some degree, the majority of those fell flat on their face. Yeah, that's what I can think of. And much like those remakes, but being darker, this follows the trend. This movie's a lot darker than the original film. A lot darker. Like this actually has much more creepy imagery than the original film. They actually try to be a little more terrifying than the original film, and actually have some pretty decent scares. But after the film was officially shot and advertised, the Amityville Horror, the remake, would be released in the United States on April 15, 2005 by MGM and Dimension Films. And this was one of the last films MGM did independently before they kind of merged with other studios. And, well, despite the negative reviews it got from critics, it still made pretty good money. But many critics thought it was derivative to the original film, and it did not deliver anything new. And it was a commercial success. It's made over $107 million worldwide on a $19 million budget. Around the time when this movie came out, like a few months before his death, George Lutz did not like the remake. The real George Lutz hated the remake and wanted to sue the producers, but around that time before that could really kick off, he had passed away. May rest in peace around that time. So, here are all the good qualities in the story of the Amityville Horror remake. So, the reasons why I think the remake is better. For one, the central plot of the film concerns George Lutz's character, showing how the house changes his personality as he becomes possessed by the evil therein. Like, this is the stuff that's scary. Like, not a bunch of flashy stuff. And you actually see some times where he's kind of like struggling with his normal personality before the house takes him over. And there's times when he kind of feels like he's trying to overcome his possessed self, but the house keeps preventing that from happening. There's times where he actually does feel sympathetic and actually does feel terrifying at the same time. Like, that's the thing. Like, actually, some people really criticize Ryan Reynolds' performance in this film, but I actually kind of liked Ryan Reynolds' performance in this film. He was both sympathetic, and when he was possessed, he was actually terrifying at the same time. Like, I thought he did a great job portraying how George's mind was gradually transformed. Like, this is the kind. Like, I kind of miss when Ryan Reynolds did a little more serious roles like this. Whether it was this, whether it was Buried, whether it was Smoking Aces, like I kind of wish you got a bit of this Reynolds back. I mean, I like his portrayal of Deadpool, but back then he actually was willing to play more normal roles back around the time this had come out. And every scene with Reynolds in the film was actually kind of a highlight. Like the rest of the cast do fine, but they don't have too much to work with. Like mostly Melissa George, who I actually thought was decent in the vampire film 30 Days and Nights, but she doesn't get a lot to do here. And director Andrew Douglas, who does keep the steps of typical horror movie and loud rumbles and suspense, like right there, and actually kind of builds a little more on it. And the execution, the writing, the acting, the visuals, like they're still solid here. Like right there, I think George Lutz gets portrayed pretty well in this, and it's definitely and honestly, I think his scenes are the best parts of the entire film. Like right there, like there's like. I mean, as much as I could wish there was a bit more to the story that they could have utilized, like, there's times I do wish, like, I'm glad this is shorter. I do wish we maybe had, like, maybe a few more scenes of, before he's possessed. Like, have a bit less of his normal self scenes, like, where where he actually gets a bit more scenes with the family, like before he gets all possessed and stuff. Like kind of what we saw when we first meet his character. Like I kind of wish we get a bit more scenes like that. That's something I feel like is kind of missing. But I like that they adopt most of the main story and the important stuff. But that's the stuff I wish we did see a little bit of. But anyway, how do we start the film off? So we start off at the murder of the Defoe family, where it's 3:15 a.m., November 13th, 1974. Ronald Defoe Jr. is possessed, and he murders his entire family, ending with the daughter Jody at their house on Ocean Avenue, 4 and 12 in Amityville, New York. And news reports then claim he's persuaded to kill them by voices here in the house, and this opening scene here, I would like it a little better if it wasn't all flashy and over bright and all over the place. Like when he murders them, like there's too many bright camera flashing moments, and that stuff's kind of distracting to see. At times, like you could make it less bright and not make it all flashy and bright as hell. Like you could have toned down the brightness of the scene, like make it a little more creepier. But then you get news reports where apparently got held in custody, got claimed the house told him to kill him. And then you get to 1 year later where you meet the Lutzes, our main characters. George and Kathy Lutz, who are now played by Ryan Reynolds and Melissa George in this version. Where when you first meet them, like they're waking up for a bit, and you get a kind of bit of a little comedic moments where the youngest son it kind of walks in the room. It's like, what are you doing with my mom? And like when George is kind of staring at him. I will admit, I do like this first scene between Reynolds and the youngest son, where like George is actually looking at the picture of their previous dad, who had passed on, and George is not actually their biological dad. Like he's just kind of moved into that place. Kathy's kind of just met him, and he even tells the kid that he doesn't have to call him dad. He could call him anything he wants, and comes up with a few little kind of like. Comes up with a few funny names, and which I will admit, I did like this first scene we see of Reynolds' character. Like, this is kind of the more scenes I wish we'd had a little bit more of. Like, this, I feel like that's some of the scenes I kind of wish we did add, and it was kind of missing from the film. Like, we don't really, once it gets to the house, like, he kind of gets a little possessed too quick. That's one problem I will do kind of have with the remake. Like, I wish we could add a bit more scenes like this. There is unfortunately though one kid in the family that does kind of get on my nerves, and that's the oldest one, Billy. Where most of the film, like long before George possessed, like Billy really just comes off as a brat for not really much of a reason. To the point where I just did not like his character. And youngest daughter is actually played by Chloe Moretz in her first role, who would later go on to play in films like Kick-Ass and voice acted it in stuff like Nimona. And eventually, George and Kathy go to this Amityville house and adopt it. And they adopt the house. No, and they move into the house. And so it's day one, and you get a bit of a move-in montage, and as things go on, like the family starts to experience paranormal events in the house, and as you know in the original, the daughter befriended the Jody ghost, and you get that here. And where this time around, you actually do see the spirit of Jody. And the makeup on Jody is pretty well done. The Jody looks pretty creepy in this version. And I like Jody's not some imaginary swine in this version. I like that Jody's actually a human person ghost. Like the ghost of the daughter who was murdered. Like, I feel that's actually more effective. Right there. And so yeah, Chelsea befriends Jody, and there's times when like sometimes George is starting to feel like sick or stuff, or the house feels cold, and that's one of the problems that I feel like the house possesses him too quickly, but you know where this is kind of going from here, and there's pretty good direction for a modern horror remake, and the cinematography, like, I really like the cinematography in this. It gives the movie this really cool, creepy feeling, and especially with some of the pretty good acting, and it's definitely more creepy or eerie than scary, and it gets the job done well, and it does feel like an old school style horror film. It's not kind of like films like, like The Shining in a way, and except this time around, like, the bad guy's a house, not a hotel. It's not a round killer, and it does make the film a bit scarier here. And I kind of like what they do here a little better, a little here than what they do in the original film. And it relies on the scares it gives. Like the film is very dark with lots of surprises jumping out. The relationship for the scenes when George is not possessed between George and Kathy are definitely pretty well built up, and it does well in trying to make the viewer feel emotions towards them as they progress on. What I think, anyways. I think everyone works well, and it does feel like quite a frightening, suspenseful film. And another one of the things that makes this remake succeed for me, if with its horror, is the movie's truth value. And whereas the DeFeo family was a real case that lived in a house, and the Lutzes were technically a real story that happened. And it does pack and play jumps that really do well in making the viewer feel a little startled. And I like it doesn't rely on too much CGI, and it looks a little more practical. There's one instance with CGI, like with the scene with the flies, like the flies in the pre-scene still happens in this movie. The horror of the film just gets based off good old-fashioned cinematography and mood of the film itself. So, eventually, one night, where after some more paranormal instances are happening, and one bit like when one of the youngest son shows George this little device he found in the basement, but George is not happy about this, and because the basement's apparently his office, it tells him not to go in there again, but he stops him from leaving and actually does apologize for a little bit. Like, this is like when he's not fully possessed yet. But you do start to see a bit of a different George in this version once this starts to happen. It's kind of what I do like is that he does while he does get possessed a little too quickly, sorry, I'm stuttering. He still has a bit of his humanity left in him at times. But it's kind of like, you can tell the house is kind of starting to take over with the way he kind of says it, and then the harsh punishment he gives Billy when he finds his keys in Billy's room and has him like do a whole bunch of firewood, and because like another thing, George gets obsessed with carrying firewood into the house. That happened in the original film. It still happens in this, and eventually Kathy finds this babysitter to watch the three kids when the couple decides to go out for one night. At first, Billy's not happy with the idea of a babysitter, but then the babysitter Lisa arrives and Billy's actually in a way attracted to the babysitter. And you find out like this was the previous babysitter that was hired by the Defoes. And then of course, Lisa then tells Billy, but Michael ends up wandering to the room, but Lisa ends up pretty much talking about the murders that took place at their house. And then when they all go to Chelsea's room, Chelsea also shows up in her bedroom, tells her she's a bad babysitter because apparently Jody thought that. And apparently, like, it's rumored that Jody was the one who got Lisa fired. But then Billy decides, I dare you to go into this closet, like the one where Jody was murdered in. And of course, when she goes in there because she wants Billy's kiss poster, she ends up getting locked inside. She thinks the boys locked her in there, but this scene does happen in the original film. Whereas although in the original film, it was only the daughter who stayed home, the other two kids were out with the Lutzes in the original movie. Like this, in this version, all three of them are at home. But this is the same scene from the original movie where the babysitter got locked in the closet. And honestly, I feel like this scene is easily one of the creepier parts of the film. Like in this scene, like after like a few seconds where she's trapped, she counters Jody herself, makes me let out, and Jody's ghost like, look what Ronnie did to me, and takes Lisa's finger, sticks it in the bullet wound in her forehead. And this scene, I will admit, I really like what they did with this scene in this version. Like this scene felt creepier, and I really feel the tension in this scene. And Jody this is what makes Jody actually frightening in this version. But then she goes into shock, and the paramedics go to take her away. Lisa tells Kathy when in the hospital that she had seen Jody. And then around this bit, like, George is getting more and more abusive because, like, the house is really starting to take over him at this point. Like, he's now really possessed right here where he's now obsessed with getting firewood. And, of constantly making Billy help him out with it, and even getting pretty rough with it. More of the paranormal stuff continues. Like at one point, even like rebuffs like Kathy's remark about how he's disciplining people. And then one night, George hears Harry barking in the boathouse, and while he's possessed, he grabs the axe and ends up pretty much accidentally murdering the dog because he mistakes it for a demonic apparition. And when the children look for Harry the next day, George doesn't know where he is, despite Billy being suspicious. And yeah, things just get bad. Things just really do get bad for the Lutz family right here. And now the thing is with this remake, I do think you have some pretty more well acted bits of George here. Like there's when I mention that bits, like when times where George still has a bit of his humanity, or whenever he's possessed. Like in one bit, like there's times when like George is isolating himself from the family and sleeping in the basement, where you see him watching the home videos when he moved into the place, and before like the whole demonic apparitions take over the footage on Billy's face in that shot, in the shot of Billy's face when they were first moving in, he has a bit of a smile on his face because, you know, he remembers, like, clearly remembering the times, like, he felt normal before when they moved into the house. Like, one of the last few times he felt like a normal person. Like, he clearly remembers that and is kind of trying to get that humanity even back and kind of misses those days. Like, you can kind of see it on George's, like, you can kind of see it on, like, George's brief happy face for a little bit that he kind of remembers that times that he kind of wishes he could have those times back, and kind of wonders what's going on with them. And but then of course, then the demonic apparitions take over, and then they're pretty much starting telling him to catch him, kill him, and they're trying to. And unfortunately, though, it's like he's kind of failing to break from his possession. He knows how much he's changed at this point, and one of this remake's strengths is the low-key nature, focusing on building suspense and paying off with good shocks. The film's not interested in reveling in blood and gore like a lot of other horror remakes would, but isn't afraid to really show some detail in the whole kind of like PG-13 feel to it. No, this movie's not rated PG-13; it's still rated R. Like, this kind of takes inspiration from films around the time this had come out, like The Ring, you know. The Ring was also a game changer for horror. Like, that was before The Ring came out, we had a lot of slasher films, and The Ring was kind of the first non-goofy styled slasher horror film to kind of really come out and really change the horror genre to a bit more of a serious genre. It really directs attention to something in frame and really does well delivers than not just the expected scare. It does hold back a little longer and does pay off in a bit more of an unexpected way. Andrew Douglas and Peter Collister really do well in shooting the film this grainy, dark style, not make anything look too slick, and keep most of the house in shadow at times. Like, that's one of the things I like about this remake. That's why I feel like Andrew Douglas and Peter really do well here. They really acknowledge that this is a pretty dark horror film. They make it really grainy and dark here with the whole cinematography. Another thing, Andrew Douglas does embellish the original plot and add some creepy new elements and its background story about the origins of the house. Like when George is wandering the basement kind of near the finale, he sees all these other dead bodies in the house, which is another pretty effective and creepy moments. And the chills are pretty well developed and the shocks are really pretty well timed to perfection. I mean, yeah, this remake is not flawless. It's not one of the best remakes of all time because I still do have some problems with it that I can agree with some people on. Well, I'll get to in the bad qualities, but the script is pretty well understanding of the simple, effective stuff, and the new version does have some pretty thrills. The performances are good. Right there, and it does feel like closer to the more supernatural feel. So this is like the one scene where you see the priest character. Remember the priest character in the original film that kind of hogged up a lot of the original film? Well, he's only in like these two scenes. And another thing, remember the detective character? They take him out of the movie. He's not in the movie either. Thank God, because I don't want to watch some detective character. I don't want to watch a priest I want to watch a priest hog up most of the film. Like, if I'm watching something like Amityville Horror, if it's about the Lutz family, aren't these the people we should be watching in the first place? And be focusing more on in the first place? Like, not some filler characters? So Kathy asked his priest, Father Calloway, to bless the house as this measure to prevent any more paranormal incidents. So when Father Calloway arrives, he tries, but he counters the occurrences himself. Like, this is the scene that happens in the original movie as well. And he flees the house. Then Kathy finds that the house belongs to this actual cult preacher named Jeremiah Ketchum. That's where you get the word Ketchum, whose evil actions towards these native people during his mission in the 17th century were the cause of the haunting. And this is the bit where, this is another one of the creepiest bits of the film, where George wanders through the basement of the house, encounters the apparitions of all the ones that got tortured and killed there centuries ago. And it's a pretty effective scene. Like, I really liked the effects on this scene, the props, like the makeup on the dead bodies, like, this felt very effective. And then he enters this dimly lit room where George encounters Ketchum himself. And the ghostly figure picks up this knife and slits his throat to recreate suicide and kind of cover George with that blood and become nearly completely possessed. And this is kind of where this ghosts are trying to make him reenact the whole Defoe scenario again. Like, I enjoy the fact that there's some psychological, emotional effects on the family. Like, people would expect to see, like, maybe some unearthly ghost possessing people or turn to zombies. No, they don't have any of that here. There's no real twist to the story. And that's what actually does make it a little more interesting. Like, there's scenes in the film that do explain why the house is what it is, though, like what it used to be, and like how it became a possessed place. Right there, like the problems I have with the original, they're trimmed down here. The remake pushes more fact than fiction. Like when Lord George tears up the basement and finds this other room, it's not like this doorway to hell like it was in the original. And like another thing, I also like Jodie is not appearing as a pig; is actually appearing as an actual ghost person. And actually she looks very well done and effective. Where she's not necessarily a ghost trying to that doesn't really hurt people, but she definitely looks like a ghost that can. And the ghost effects are well done, and the cinematography is well done. The musical score even by Steve J. Blonsky also creates this dark, ominous atmosphere. Like, you can tell this film really wants the viewers to scream and jump, and for a while it does kind of make me. There are some jump scenes in the film. So, now we get on with the finale. And, well, to be fair, I also do have a problem with the finale in this version. So, we all know by now Kathy is now convinced that George's abusive behavior is owed to possession. And Father Calloway urges Kathy to leave the house with her children and get them back to safety. But George is now possessed by this point and wants to kill her and the children, especially after Kathy sees all the coffins there, the coffins inside that basement that say her kids' names. And then outside, George's still trying to kill them. But then, of course, where now, I like how in this one, George, like, after, in the original where George, like, pushed Kathy to the side, but then suddenly realized what he did, and then just became unpossessed like that. I like it's not anticlimactic with how he gets unpossessed. And actually doesn't really get unpossessed till they're far away from the house. So thankfully they fixed that problem in the original, because that's an annoying scene in the original where where pushing to the side just suddenly breaks him out of his possession at that point. Which was just lazy, but they knock him out, and after a bit of a scuffle for a little while, and of course, well, I mean, like, another thing, like, before this whole bit, like, one bit Kathy falls in the water, her gets tangled in a boat propeller, but George doesn't kill her, and actually does kind of break out of that for a little bit, and ends up kind of releasing her hair from the boat propeller. And then after all the other stuff I mentioned, Kathy knocks him out to prevent him from being able to kill anybody. Like, he has a little hallucination where he does kill Kathy, but it's just a hallucination, and he snaps out of it. He begs her not to kill him because he'll kill her, but Kathy says that nobody's going to die, and then knocks him out. And so they transfer away from the residence via this boat, and that's how George gets released from the spirit's control. That's better. See, like, it's better when he gets released when they're far away from the house. That's not as anticlimactic. And he tells her, don't look at it. Let's just get out of here. And he's kind of just looking around, like, the kids are just kind of staring blank stares on their faces, and you can kind of see in his face that he kind of wonders what he's done. In a way, kind of like confused as to kind of what he's done and why they're staring at him like that. And And then and then of course they flee the house on boat, unlike the original where they'd float away by car. But this title card says that, of course, they left the house, left within 28 days, and they never came back for their personal stuff. And the another bit here where you do get kind of a cheesy jump scare where you see Jodie's ghost just standing in the now empty house. And she just screams in terror, like, and her face is just moving around. Which was honestly that was honestly such a stupid shot. Like, you did not need to show that. That the house rearranges itself back to its estate before the family's arrival, and then Jodie's just standing there, and then these random pair of possessed ghost hands pull her beneath the floor, and then it's just over. Like, that's another thing. Like, while thankfully George gets unpossessed in a much less anticlimactic way, the ending of this movie just feels abrupt. Like, this movie just ends a little, like, this ending scene goes on a little too quickly. Like, I feel like you should have fixed this ending a little bit. Like, like kind of a little bit more the longer shot of, like, George wondering what he's done and stuff. Like, kind of start to wonder if he's kind of destroyed his relationship with the family. Like, you could have, like, improved this. Like, kind of made a bit more of a better ending. Like that's the stuff you could have fixed. Like, especially because I kind of wish we had a bit more scenes of his relationship with the family, like, before he got possessed. Instead of kind of rushing to his possession straight away. And I wish we did not, yeah, that would be better than, ending on another damn jump scare. Like, still keep the title card, but you do not need to end the story on its damn jump scare of Jodie twitching her face around and freaking out. Like, that was such a stupid fucking shot. I hated that. That was such a lazy jump scare to end the movie on. And these random ghost hands that you don't know who this ghost is. You don't know who it is. Like, it's these random hands that you never saw, like, just pull her back beneath the floor and the teddy bear lying there, and then it just abruptly shuts off and it's over. So I don't really like, so yeah. One thing I can agree on, one thing I can see where people are coming from, I don't like the way this movie ends. It feels too abrupt, and it has a shitty jump scare, instead of actually trying to have a bit more of a like, better resolution ending. So does the movie have bad quality, since we're getting to that? Yeah. There's the ending bit I mentioned, and the scenes, like, I wish there was more scenes when George was normal. Like, had a bit more scenes of his time with the kids. Other stuff is that the editing does get a little too quick cut and spin the camera around. It gets flashy lighty sometimes. Like, the opening scene, there's way too many camera flashes, and I feel like that could have been toned down. There are some bits of the film that get thrown in the mix as well. And while I do like Ryan Reynolds' performance, there are some times, though, when he does get a little too soft-voiced. Like, whenever he yells at the kid characters, and you can tell, like, when they're filming those scenes, he's clearly struggling not to break character in those bits. It kind of sounds like he feels too bad yelling at the kid actors. Like, yeah, it's okay, it's understandable if you feel bad yelling at your child co-stars, but if you're playing a horror character, especially a possessed parent like George Lutz, you kind of gotta be rough. You kind of gotta sound a little rough. Well, then again, to be fair, this was the first time Reynolds actually did play a serious role. Like, he did master it, thankfully, better in Smoking Aces, that I will say. But there were just some things that could have been worked on. I don't think this remake is as bad as people make it out to be. I can see some people's problems with it, but I don't think it's one of the worst remakes of all time. There are worse remakes I've seen than this. I think Elm Street 2010 is worse. I think Cabin Fever 2016 is worse. I think Black Wokemas from 2019 is damn worse. I even think the How to Train Your Dragon shot-for-shot remake is worse than this movie. Yeah, I'm sorry to say that, but I think that film is worse. At the very least, this was not a lazy shot-for-shot film like Gus Van Sant's Psycho or that movie or The Omen 2006. At the very least, this was not a lazy shot-for-shot remake like those. Like the... God, man. There's, oh yeah, some of the PG-13 horror remakes, like When a Stranger Calls, oh, fucking Prom Night, the fucking Fog are all worse. I think that a lot of worse remakes than this film is. This is not one of the worst remakes of all time. At the very least, this doesn't botch a lot of stuff. This actually tries to be a scary film. So other than those little nitpicks I have, I don't mind this remake. It's not one of the best remakes of all time, but it's a remake I can pop on once in a while. It's an enjoyably creepy remake. So in the end, I would probably stream Amityville Horror 2005 if you kind of want a better version, because while it is somewhat a better version to me anyways, it still does suffer some problems at times, but it is better paced and does feel more focused on the important stuff. Anyways, that's it for my review of Amityville Horror 2005. We're not going to rank Amityville Horror 2005. Here's how I'm going to rank this movie. So overall, if you want a more modern adaptation of the Amityville Horror story that is slightly better, then you'll get that with this remake, but I would really just stream this one online because while it has some better stuff, it does lag a bit still. And if we're going to rank Amityville Horror 2005, I'm going to give the Amityville Horror 2005 a 7 out of 10. Alright, there we go, guys. Officially wraps up my review for both the Amityville horror films, the original and the remake. So, what's going to be our next episode? Well, our next episode is going to be the start of these pieces of shit. Yeah, we're finally doing reviews for these. Yeah, Shadow Gamer, we're finally doing reviews for all three of these. Well, this week I'm only doing these two. I'll save this for one part of Halloween Horror Review 6 to kind of build up my energy on this one. Because you can tell how that rant is going to go. But, yeah, Jaws 2 is our next episode. And then Jaws 3D. And that'll be the end of week 2. Until then, guys, that will be it for this episode of review. Tell me what you thought down in the comments down below. What you guys think of the remake, whether you decently don't mind this or whether you actually really hate this remake. Thank you all for watching. And if you like this, want to see more, and don't forget to like, subscribe to Don G. Corleone.